For generations, the Guadalupe River has been the lifeblood of Texas Hill Country. But on July 4th, 2025, this river transformed into something unrecognizable, something deadly. Before we can understand what happened that morning, we need to know what led up to it. Central Texas had been suffering through one of its longest droughts on record, nearly 4 years of parched earth and dwindling water supplies. According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the 20 counties that would later be included in the flood disaster declaration had experienced 180 weeks of at least severe drought conditions since late 2021. By July 2025, 60% of these counties were in moderate to extreme drought. The Edwards Aquifer had dropped below levels not seen since 1993. Medina Lake was barely 2% full. The National Integrated Drought Information System has noted that the region was going through one of its longest droughts on record and badly impacting agriculture, water resources, and ecosystems. Then, in late June of 2025, Tropical Storm Barry formed in the Gulf of Mexico. Though it made landfall in Mexico before weakening, its remnants would play a crucial role in what was to come. What came next has come to be known as weather whiplash, the sudden shift from one extreme environmental condition to another that amplifies the effects of the individual extreme events. A jump from severe drought to a 1 in 1,000 year precipitation event can cause catastrophic conditions. And that's exactly what happened. That part of Texas is known as Flash Flood Alley for a reason. The ground in this part of Texas is mainly steep slopes of limestone covered by a shallow layer of soil. So when it rains, the water tends to run off quickly, funneling into rivers. On July 2nd, meteorologists were tracking what was left of Tropical Storm Barry as it embedded itself into a broader trough of moisture from the East Pacific. This would prove catastrophic. It created what's known as an atmospheric river, a concentrated corridor of water vapor in the atmosphere. When these atmospheric rivers make landfall, they can release huge amounts of rain in a short period. The amount of water being moved through the atmosphere was as high as it had ever been for July in that region. The heaviest rain you can imagine was on its way. On July 3rd at 1:18 p.m., a flood watch for Kerr County and surrounding areas was issued. Warning of 1 to 3 inches of rain, with isolated areas potentially seeing up to 7 inches. At 6:10 p.m., there was another alert warning people that areas of flash flooding will be likely across central Texas overnight with very heavy rainfall expected. By 11:41 p.m. on July 3rd, conditions had gotten so bad that the National Weather Service issued the first of many flash flood warnings for nearby Bandera County. As July 4th began, most residents of Kerr County were asleep, unaware of the disaster unfolding around them. Just after midnight, the Guadalupe River rose 10 feet in just 15 minutes. At 1:14 a.m., the National Weather Service issued a second flash flood warning for parts of Bandera and Kerr counties. This triggered wireless emergency alerts on cell phones. At 4:03 a.m., a flash flood emergency was issued for Hunt and Ingram, urging residents to seek higher ground now. It warned that rainfall rates of up to 4 inches per hour would keep hitting an already saturated area. The Guadalupe River at Hunt had shot up to over 20 feet within the last hour. At 4:22 a.m., a firefighter from Ingram spoke to a sheriff's office dispatcher. The Guadalupe Schumacher sign is underwater on State Highway 39.
Is there any way we can send a code red out to our Hunt residents asking them to find higher ground or stay home?
Standby, we have to get that approved with our supervisor.
The first code red alert wouldn't go out until 90 minutes later, and some messages took nearly 6 hours to reach residents. This delay would become a focal point in investigations into the disaster response. The system was supposed to send out automated calls, texts, and emails to people in danger zones, but it got swamped by the number of alerts. On top of that, the approval process for sending emergency notifications had multiple steps and needed a sign-off from supervisors who were tough to reach overnight. The Guadalupe River kept rising at an unprecedented rate, 26 feet in about 45 minutes. At 5:10 a.m., the river gauge at Hunt hit a record level of 37.52 feet, which is the highest it's ever been, even higher than the terrible floods of 1987 that claimed 10 lives. It probably went even higher, but the flood's force was so great that it stopped updating, likely getting damaged by the floodwaters. At 5:34 a.m., another flash flood emergency was issued for Kerrville and Centerpoint, warning of a large and deadly flood wave moving down the Guadalupe River. By daybreak, the Guadalupe River at Kerrville rose within 2 hours from just 2 feet to over 30 feet deep. One of the hardest hit spots was Camp Mystic. Camp Mystic was an all-girls summer camp located along the Guadalupe River. It had been a beloved institution in the Hill Country for nearly a century. That night, about 750 girls were staying there, many in cabins located in what FEMA called a special flood hazard area. Basically, the part of the floodplain that's most at risk for fast-moving floodwaters. The owners figured that not all the cabins were really at risk, so they used FEMA's appeals process to get any buildings outside the floodplain reclassified. A legal move that's been slammed for encouraging risky building in flood-prone areas. Normally, the owners would have a point, but this wasn't a normal situation. What a lot of parents didn't realize was that Camp Director Dick Eastland had been a big supporter of flood safety measures since the 1987 flood. He teamed up with local officials to create an early warning system that included river gauges and communication protocols. Unfortunately, over the years, the upkeep of this system slipped, and by 2025, much of it was out of order. Even when it was working, it relied on visually checking for rising water levels. There was no automatic warning system in place. At 2:30 a.m., Camp Director Dick got a flood alert on his phone and began evacuation procedures, by which time the river was already rising rapidly. The issue was that Camp Mystic didn't have proper evacuation procedures or emergency communication systems set up. Their flood protocols were outdated, and the staff were unclear about the evacuation routes and where to find assembly points. The camp's emergency communication mainly depended on walkie-talkies, which proved inadequate during the crisis as staff became separated and communication broke down. Despite the chaos, Dick and the staff did all they could to rescue the girls. Fighting against the rising water, they forced their way through to get everyone to higher ground. For some, it wasn't enough. Dick, along with at least 26 others, were swept away by the water. This was just the beginning. As morning broke on July 4th, emergency services launched a massive rescue operation. By the end of the day, at least 237 people had been rescued from floodwaters, including 167 people rescued from trees and roofs via helicopter. The Texas Department of Public Safety, Texas Military Department, Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, Texas A&M Task Force 1, and local first responders worked tirelessly to reach anyone stranded by the rapidly rising waters. First responders had a tough time with things like telecom outages, blocked roads from debris, and the huge search area along the Guadalupe River. As reported by ABC News, by July 8th, over 440 people had been rescued. But sadly, the death toll was still rising as search teams kept finding more bodies. The response involved teams from at least 12 U.S. states and Mexico, including specialized urban search and rescue units, swiftwater rescue teams, and drone operators. A command center was set up where parents gathered looking for news about their children from Camp Mystic and other affected areas. The search and rescue operation quickly grew to include teams from all over the country. Over 2,000 volunteers helped with emergency operations in Kerr County alone, including guardsmen, professional rescuers, tracker dogs, and swiftwater rescue personnel. On July 9th, NASA sent 2 disaster response aircraft to help state and local authorities with the recovery operation. These could spot flooding under tree canopies and see through vegetation affected by rain. This was essential to search and rescue operations, providing critical data to people on the ground. For instance, it was key in locating stranded survivors in the densely wooded areas along the Guadalupe River. Then, just as recovery efforts were gaining momentum, nature dealt another blow. On July 13th, there were heavy rains in the area that caused more flooding. This second round of rain, although not as intense as the downpour on July 4th, hit ground that was already soaked and waterways that were swollen from earlier flooding. The Lampasas River rose over 30 feet. This led to more rescues and evacuations, and forced search and recovery efforts to shut down temporarily along the Guadalupe River until the worst passed. While the teams along the Guadalupe were waiting for the rain to let up, several search and rescue operations took place in different counties, including Lampasas, San Saba, and Schleicher. Texas Task Force 1 and Texas Parks and Wildlife went to work doing water rescues along the Lampasas. By July 15th, the weather had finally settled down, allowing recovery operations to resume in full force. As recovery efforts continued, political tensions flared over funding and responsibility. Governor Greg Abbott called a special session of the Texas legislature to tackle flood relief funding, but things quickly got stuck in partisan squabbles over issues that had nothing to do with the floods. Flood victims felt like they were being used as political pawns while they desperately needed help with debris removal, insurance claim denials, and mold removal. Local residents pointed out that Abbott could use his emergency budget powers to release $70 million right away for housing repairs, debris cleanup, and mental health care without needing legislative approval. By mid-August, the political landscape began to shift as victims and their families testified before legislative committees. Parents of children who died at Camp Mystic testified before a Texas State Senate committee in support of Senate Bill 1, which aimed to improve safety standards at youth camps across the state. They shared emotional testimonies about their children and criticized the lack of adequate warning systems, evacuation plans, and safety measures at the camp. The bill would require camps to have emergency rooftop ladders in every cabin located in floodplains, come up with flash flood evacuation plans, create a line of succession for local officials during disasters, and simplify casualty reporting procedures. Other provisions in the proposed legislation include camps needing to do annual flood evacuation drills, having working weather radios with backup power, and set up water level monitoring equipment if they're within 500 feet of a waterway. The bill also makes it necessary for camps to share info with parents about their emergency response plans and flood history before children attend. The testimony showed that back in 2016, the then sheriff of Kerr County was all for setting up a warning system with sirens, but some officials were worried about the noise from sirens going off by mistake. Talks about funding and building the system lasted until at least 2021, but nothing comprehensive ever got sorted out. Kerr County asked for government grants in 2017 and 2018 for extra measuring gear, upgrades to the existing water gauge systems, and software website for real-time info for the public, but those requests were turned down. The emotional testimony from grieving parents struck a chord. By August 20th, the legislature had passed 6 bills related to flood and disaster relief, including one to allocate hundreds of millions in state funds for recovery efforts. As the waters receded, the full extent of the destruction became clear. It's believed that the final death toll was around 135, possibly more, with 117 in Kerr County alone, making it the deadliest inland flooding event in the United States since the 1976 Big Thompson River flood in Colorado. The economic impact was staggering. Initial estimates put property damage at over $2.3 billion. More than 4,200 homes were destroyed or severely damaged. Critical infrastructure, including bridges, roads, and water treatment facilities, would need to be rebuilt. As of August 2025, 3 people were still missing from the floods, including those of an 8-year-old girl from Camp Mystic. Many families impacted by the Camp Mystic tragedy have started advocacy groups to push for better safety regulations at summer camps nationwide. Governor Greg Abbott has updated the disaster proclamation for counties affected by the July flash floods, extending emergency provisions and state resources to help with recovery efforts. The proclamation includes 20 counties in central Texas, with a particular emphasis on Kerr County, where most of the fatalities occurred. The waters of the Guadalupe River have gone down, but the impact of the 2025 Texas flash floods will be felt for generations. The river that took so much from these communities is still beautiful and vital to the region. But now, there's a new respect for its power and a determination to be ready when the waters rise again. If you found this video interesting, please consider subscribing. It's helping a lot.